Hi, my name is Marcus and I play the shakuhachi. Last weekend, the ESS, the European Shakuhachi Society, had a 2-day shakuhachi workshop, and maybe you've seen the video that I made about this a few weeks ago. Today I want to report what happened at the event, but please note that this is just me with my participant's hat on, so even though I'm involved with the ESS in an official role as well, I'm not talking for the ESS here, I'm just myself today. We had 5 really good teachers. 3 were from Europe, 1 was from Japan, and 1 was from the US. And although we're looking forward to meeting in person again, and we hopefully will be able to do this in Dublin next summer, the great thing about doing these things online and the good thing about modern technology is that you can join in from all over the world. So we not only had teachers from very far away, but we also had some participants. And I want to give a special shout out to the participants from the US who got up in the middle of the night. For them it started at 3:30 at night, but they still got up and participated, so that's proper dedication. I'll just go with the order in which the workshops took place. So I'll start with Shiori Tanabe. She is one of the top players in Japan at the moment. She has a Shihan, so that means she has a teaching license from the Tozan Ryu, so from the Tozan lineage, but is also very active in developing her own style of music and combining modern music and music making techniques with shakuhachi. Really, one of the best aspects of attending such events is to have the opportunity to see these world-class players close up and hear what they have to say about shakuhachi playing. She led a session with practice tips and then taught 2 pieces, Mine no Tsuki, which is a traditional Tozan piece, and Kari, translated geese, which is a modern piece composed by Yamamoto Hozan, the shakuhachi legend, in 1968. I'm actually not very familiar with the Tozan school. I've really only encountered it at events like this. But I again got the sense that there is a very clear distinction between the parts of a piece that should be reproduced as exactly as possible and other parts where the player can improvise, a bit like a cadenza in a classical solo concert. To give a bit more background maybe, generally speaking, compared to Western classical music, for shakuhachi there is greater freedom in how you play pieces. In my own lineage, for example, there is quite great freedom to change small things like fingerings to get maybe a slightly different tone color, but also major things like leaving out phrases or parts or even add something. The basic view here is that simply if you can make it better, just do it. Of course, there's the understanding as well that it's quite difficult to improve on a piece that has already gone through this process for a few hundred years. So the Tozan approach seems to be a bit different in this respect, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Are you a Tozan player? If you are, and I'm completely off the mark, please leave me a comment, or please confirm what I say and leave me a comment. I'd be really curious to know. I've been wondering about this for a while, so if you can clarify this a bit, that would be really great. A few of the technical aspects that she talked about and that I found quite interesting is that playing long notes is the core exercise. This is not surprising. You basically do this in every shakuhachi lineage and you do this for every wind instrument. But she had some really useful tips on not just playing rubuki, but doing even just a simple exercise, just playing every note twice, but going up the scale slowly. So playing ro again, then playing tsu again, and so going up all the way until you get to the highest note. In Kiku we would call it go no ha, and then from that go down back to otsu no ro, so to the basic note again. And I've tried this a couple of times now, and this is really an effective way of practicing, so that was a very useful tip. She also said it's very useful to integrate yuri practice, so vibrato techniques, so basically this into the practice of long notes, so that you can practice different yuri techniques, different depth, and so on. And again, that makes a lot of sense. Then one aspect that seems to be particular for Tozan, I'm not sure I've seen this in other schools, is that they have different types of yuri, which they actually distinguish. So one is iki yuri, so breath yuri. This would be like, my understanding again, would be like a normal vibrato that you have in Western wind instruments. Then you have the yoku uri, or sideways yuri, so the which is very characteristic of shakuhachi playing. But there is also a special notation and a special technique for having just one movement to the side. This is called yoko atari, and it just means go to the side once. So, as always, fascinating stuff. Let's continue with the next teacher. That was Horacio Curti. And he is actually sort of my shakuhachi brother, if you like. We both have the same teacher, which is Kakizakai Kaoru sensei. And a bit more background maybe. He has been playing shakuhachi for longer than I have, and he organized an ESS summer school in Barcelona where he lives. And of course he invited his teacher. Most organizers do that, and that's a great thing, of course. And this is where I met Kaki sensei, and shortly after that I became his student too. So of course, I'm very grateful for Horacio for making this connection. But this situation also, of course, means that there was not a lot of new information for me in his lesson. But it's really always good to go back to basics and listen to how somebody else understood the same teaching that you had. Because invariably, it will be a bit different and you learn something in the process as well. So this is just like going back to basics again and again and again, which is very important for learning shakuhachi. He taught a solo version of one of the few duo pieces that exist in the Honkyoku repertoire, so in the classical shakuhachi repertoire, Shika no Tone. And connecting back to the point that I made a bit earlier, in KSK, you're encouraged to make up your own solo version. There is no official solo version of this piece. And Horacio actually was very adamant that people should create their own version. So he basically made a suggestion in this workshop, but it's not an official version, so everybody really should make up their own. Notable points in the piece I found was that there are many so-called suriage in this piece, and it was really good to go through these again. So it starts. So this is a very characteristic phrase in the piece, and it was really just very good to go through everything again. He explained everything in very great detail, so this was really very useful for me too. And he also made a remark that tsumeri, so this note half a step above ro, is one of the really tricky notes on the shakuhachi, which is basically always too high. It's really difficult to play it at the correct pitch. But in this piece, Shika no Tone, it's especially difficult to play this at the correct pitch, he said. And I never realized this before, but I think he's actually correct. So this was really very useful for me. The second teacher from outside Europe was Araki Kodo VI, or also known as Hans Araki. His family history is quite literally the history of shakuhachi. It's going back to the mid-19th century when his lineage started with Kodo I and II, and after that it was just passed down the generations in his family. Kiku did an interview with him a while ago, which was when I first really took notice of this shakuhachi lineage. I'll put a link in the description. Please go and watch the interview. It's really very interesting. But this also shows how little I really know about the shakuhachi world outside of the KSK. Unfortunately, my Japanese is rudimentary at best, and I've not lived in Japan for any extended period, so I'm really relying on people to bridge this gap for me. As far as I understand it, Kodo VI, or Hans, grew up mainly in the US, so there is no language barrier at all, or a cultural barrier on the one hand, and on the other hand, there is this really deep understanding of the old shakuhachi traditions. So he is really in a very unique position, and he offered really some great insights. He taught two pieces, Tsuki no Kyoku and Dokyo, and talked about his family history, and also gave a session on the technique that they use in his lineage. In his lineage, they mainly play the traditional Kinko repertoire, but these two pieces were actually composed by his ancestors. So Tsuki no Kyoku was composed by Araki Kodo II in 1907, roughly at least, and Dokyo was composed by his father, Araki Kodo V, in 1986. And Dokyo, he said, is actually a bit of a practice piece for transitions between notes with the same pitch but different fingerings, which is one of the characteristics of shakuhachi. So, for example, at the very start of Dokyo, you have a sequence of ro, ha, which is the same pitch. So ha in their lineage is the same pitch as ro, but it's a different fingering. So it starts something like this. So the tone color is noticeably different between these two notes, and tone color is a very important aspect in the way they are playing. Some other takeaways from his lessons are that the notation, of course, is different because it's different for every school and for every player really. But one of the aspects is that meri is usually not notated, but it's just assumed. So if you have notated a tsu, for example, then when you go down, it's assumed that it's tsu no meri, so a low tsu. But if you go up, it's a kari. So it's just a normal neutral tsu pitch. So depending on which way the melody goes, it is actually a different note, even though it uses the same symbol. There are also some noticeable difference in technique. So one quite fancy fingering, which he explained, is that when you repeat tsu meri, you can actually do it by sliding across the hole. So you start by playing tsu meri, and then circling around the hole without changing the pitch, which I've not mastered yet. And then make the repeat by sliding across the hole. Something like this anyway. So it's a really cool idea. So I'll definitely practice this and try to find opportunities to use this. But it definitely requires quite a bit of practice. The other thing I want to mention is that the yuri that they're doing is not mainly done by shaking the head, which is basically universal in all shakuhachi playing. So doing it like that, but instead he's actually using the right hand. Which at first seemed a completely crazy and wild idea, but after I've been doing it for a few minutes, it actually feels quite natural as well, and is not as difficult to control as I always imagined. So that's really interesting. I found that really eye-opening that that is possible as well. And the final aspect I just want to briefly mention here is that he said it's not really necessary to adopt a specific technique just because that's the technique that has always been used. So he told the anecdote that one of his students is a professional oboe player. He has been playing for 40 years, so his breath vibrato is perfect, of course. And so when he's playing, he says there is no need for him to develop any other technique, but he should just continue doing that, even though doing this vibrato is quite different from what we usually do on the shakuhachi. So it is very open-minded, and that is an attitude that I can relate to very easily as well. So moving on to the second European teacher, Philip Horan. He is an Irish shakuhachi player and has done a lot of work in playing Irish music on the shakuhachi. He has published a few books with scores of Irish tunes for the shakuhachi. And maybe this is not an obvious connection at first, and I'm by no means an expert in Celtic music, but there are quite a few surprising parallels in traditional Japanese and Celtic folk music. What he did in the workshops was, again, very interesting for me. Some practices for technique, and then he also taught an Irish tune, the Rocky Road to Dublin. One thing I found really useful is that you may know that the shakuhachi is a pentatonic flute, so just by opening the holes you can only produce 5 notes instead of the 7 notes that we typically have in Western scales. And he had some really good techniques on how to play 7-note scales on the shakuhachi, or play pieces with the 7-note scale on the shakuhachi. One way in which you can achieve that is that you use alternate fingerings that are especially suitable for playing fast pieces, because these Celtic tunes, as you may know, have very often very fast melodies and very fast succession of notes, which is not always easy to do on the shakuhachi. So he developed fingerings that are suited for this style of playing, fingerings that not always produce a very stable tone, but when you play very fast, that doesn't really make much of a difference anyway. And it makes playing these fast notes, these fast sequences of notes for a long time easier. So that's really very great. I found that really very interesting. He also had some tips on long note practice. So for example, to practice a Dorian scale, the Rocky Road to Dublin is written in a Dorian scale. And to get that into your ear, he suggested just playing each note of the scale, but always going back to the bass note in between. So you always get the reference. So you always know what the scale is based on. Even though this session was quite short, unfortunately, I mean, there is just so much you can do in 2 days. There is not really very much time. But the plan, as I already said, is to have the next summer school in Dublin next year. Philip will be organizing it. And so hopefully we'll have much more opportunity to play Irish music on the shakuhachi. Then finally, the third European teacher was Nina Haarer from Germany. And like Horacio and myself, she holds a Shihan from the KSK. But in addition to that, she is also playing the Chikuho repertoire, which she learned from Jim Franklin, who learned it from Riley Lee, who learned it from Chikuho himself, as far as I know the line. Sadly, I really only know very little about Chikuho, but again, I must say it's really fantastic music. So I've heard Riley Lee and Jim Franklin play some pieces of this lineage, and it's really nice. I really like it a lot. So this was a great opportunity to go through a piece of this lineage and to get a bit more of an understanding of it. The piece that she played was Oshu Nagashi, and that's a classical Chikuho Honkyoku. The title means wandering through the inner provinces, and it refers to wandering komuso, wandering through provinces. They were mendicant monks, and so they were out in nature a lot. And this piece captures this imagery of wandering through the mountains, seeing waterfalls, hearing the wind rustle in the leaves, and so on. And Nina really made it so easy to follow all the explanations, all the differences in techniques that you have there. So that was really very nice. Technique-wise, what is quite a pronounced difference to the KSK way of playing is that for mawashi yuri, so for phrases like this, the way I was taught is that you always alternate between the pitches exactly. So the interval between the two notes always has to remain the same. But this is not done in Chikuho. There actually the interval becomes smaller and you get quieter at the same time. So that took me a bit of getting used to, I must say, but just because I was taught differently. So again, a very interesting point and something I would not have learned outside of this event. So that was really great. So just as I said at the beginning, this is just what I took away from the lessons. This is not an official ESS statement. And as usual, the days were just packed and it was hard to take in all the information, especially as I had to keep an eye out on the tech as well and keep everything running. But it's just so good to see what's out there, what other schools are doing, and as I mentioned before, especially not living in Japan and not having access to this information so easily, these are always great opportunities. These events are just such a great way to see what's out there, to get inspired, to get new ideas, to see how it's done, and to meet other shakuhachi players, which of course is easier if you're in person rather than in a Zoom session. But it's always good to meet other people who pursue the same shakuhachi dream as you, or I at least do. Okay, I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please leave me a comment, please subscribe to the channel, please ring the bell, all the usual YouTube things. I'd really like to hear if you like this event report kind of video. This is the first one that I did, and of course it's very much centered on me because I'm talking about what I got out of this event. So maybe this is just too self-indulgent and you don't really care what I'm thinking. If you'd like to see more of these videos, again, please just leave a comment. My channel is still in its infancy really, so I'm still looking for good video formats to make videos that you find interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.